Hey guys, tonight we're casting off from familiar shores and setting sail, not on a sturdy galleon with charts and compass, but on a magnificent double-hulled voyaging canoe under a vast, star-dusted sky into the immense, seemingly endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Imagine yourself on the deck of such a vessel, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hulls, the creak of timber and coconut fiber lashings, the scent of salt spray in the air, and all around you, nothing but an unbroken horizon of deep blue water? Tonight, we're embarking on a journey to understand the incredible, almost magical skills of the early Polynesian navigators, the wayfinders who, with no metal instruments, no written language as we know it, and no GPS, obviously, intentionally explored and settled one of the most enormous and sparsely islanded regions on our planet. Now, if you were suddenly put in charge of navigating a canoe across thousands of miles of open ocean to find a tiny, unseen island using only your wits, the stars, and the feel of the waves under your canoe, you probably won't survive this without accidentally discovering a new continent called, oops, I missed Hawaii by 1,000 miles. And now I'm talking to a albatross. It was an art of profound observation and deep connection with the natural world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please do let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always wonderful to think of these ancient seafaring tales reaching you across the digital waves. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself adrift, metaphorically speaking, on the largest ocean on Earth, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the Great Ocean of Kiwa, as it is known in some Polynesian traditions. It is a realm of staggering vastness, covering nearly a third of the planet's surface, a seemingly endless blue canvas dotted with thousands of islands, some volcanic and mountainous, others low-lying coral atolls, scattered like tiny jewels across immense distances. For centuries, this was the last great frontier of human exploration and settlement, a liquid continent whose secrets were gradually unlocked by some of the most skilled and courageous mariners the world has ever known, the Polynesians. Their voyages, undertaken in remarkable ocean-going canoes, represent one of the most extraordinary chapters in human migration, a testament to their sophisticated understanding of the natural world and their unwavering determination to explore and settle the unknown. The area we call Polynesia, a vast triangle with its corners roughly at Hawaii in the north, Aotearoa, New Zealand in the southwest, and Rapa Nui, Easter Island in the southeast, was one of the last regions on Earth to be populated by humans. A key historical fact is that this incredible expansion, the settlement of these widely dispersed island groups, occurred relatively recently in human history, primarily between about 800 CE and 1300 CE, though the earlier Lapita migrations laid the groundwork much further back in time, spreading out from Southeast Asia into near Oceania. But the final push into the remote corners of East Polynesia, across truly daunting stretches of open ocean, often exceeding 2,000 miles between island groups, was a uniquely Polynesian achievement. And they did it all without the aid of compasses, sextants, chronometers, or any of the other navigational instruments that later European explorers considered essential. No GPS, no satellite phone, no helpful app saying in 200 nautical miles, turn slightly starboard at the suspiciously large shark. This is what makes their achievement so astonishing, and for a long time, so baffling to Western scholars. How could they have intentionally navigated to find these tiny, isolated specks of land in such a vast, watery void? Early European explorers, encountering Polynesians on these remote islands, were often incredulous, sometimes attributing their presence to accidental drift voyages, to canoes blown off course, or even, in some more fanciful theories, to lost continents or wandering Israelites. The idea that these primitive peoples, as they were often condescendingly viewed, could have possessed such sophisticated navigational knowledge that allowed for deliberate, targeted, two-way voyaging seemed almost impossible. But the Polynesian Navigators, the PWO, a term from the Caroline Islands for a master navigator, though similar roles and reverence existed across Polynesia, were masters of a deeply intricate and holistic system of wayfinding. They didn't rely on a single instrument. They relied on their profound, lifetime immersion in the ocean environment, their encyclopedic memorized knowledge, and their acutely honed senses. They read the stars like a celestial map. They understood the subtle language of ocean swells and wave patterns. They observed the flight paths of birds, the color of the water, the drift of clouds, the scent of vegetation on the wind, 1,000 tiny clues that, when woven together, could guide them accurately across thousands of miles of open sea. A quirky, though perhaps deeply insightful aspect of some Polynesian cosmologies is the idea that the ocean wasn't seen as a barrier, but as a connector, a series of pathways between islands, which were often conceptualized as being in a familial relationship with each other. The navigator's task was to know these pathways, these sea roads, as intimately as one might know the paths through their own village. This perspective transforms the void into a known, if challenging, landscape. The precise extent to which early Polynesian voyages were primarily aimed at deliberate colonization of new, unseen lands versus maintaining contact between already settled island groups, or even if they were sometimes voyages of no return for exiled groups, is a topic long debated by anthropologists, archaeologists, and historians of Pacific voyaging. What is clear is that their navigational system was robust enough to allow for repeated, targeted landfalls on islands that were often mere pinpricks on the vast ocean chart. So, as you stand on the deck of your imaginary voyaging canoe, the familiar sight of land long since faded behind you, the endless horizon stretching in every direction, you begin to appreciate the sheer courage and skill required. The sun will be your guide by day, the stars by night, the subtle patterns of the waves beneath your hull, the direction of the wind, the flight of a distant seabird. These will be your charts, your compass, your sextant. It's a world where the navigator is not just an observer of nature, but a deep listener, a reader of its most subtle signs, a partner in its ancient rhythms. The Pacific Void is not empty, it is filled with information. If only you have the wisdom, passed down through generations, to perceive it. Our journey tonight is to try and understand just a fraction of that incredible, almost lost art of Polynesian wayfinding. You're standing now, not just on any vessel, but on a marvel of ancient maritime engineering, a Polynesian voyaging canoe, the very instrument that allowed these remarkable people to conquer the vast, seemingly empty, expanses of the Pacific Ocean. This isn't some crude log raft or a flimsy outrigger designed for sheltered lagoon fishing. The Waka Horua in Maori, the Va'amotu in Tahitian, the Kaulua in Hawaiian, whatever the specific local name. These double-hulled voyaging canoes were sophisticated, highly seaworthy craft, the result of centuries, if not millennia, of accumulated shipbuilding knowledge and adaptation to the unique challenges of long-distance ocean travel. They were, in essence, the Polynesian equivalent of a spacecraft designed to carry entire communities, their provisions, their plants, and their animals, across thousands of miles of open water to find and settle new, often unseen, island homes. Forget your luxury cruise liner with its buffet and shuffleboard. This was exploration and migration at its most elemental and courageous, powered by wind, muscle, and an extraordinary understanding of the sea. Imagine yourself on the deck of one of these magnificent vessels. It's likely a double-hulled canoe, consisting of two long, sleek hulls, often carved from massive tree trunks like koa in Hawaii, or other suitable hardwoods found on Pacific islands, set parallel to each other and connected by a sturdy central platform or deck. This double-hulled design provided immense stability in rough ocean swells, making it far less prone to capsizing than a single-hulled vessel. A key historical fact is that these canoes could be enormous, some reaching lengths of 60 to 100 feet, 18 to 30 meters, or even more, capable of carrying dozens of people. along with their essential supplies for a long voyage taro, breadfruit, and sweet potato cuttings for planting in new lands, domesticated animals like pigs, dogs, and chickens, tools, weapons, and precious water stored in gourds or bamboo containers. It was a veritable floating ark, a self-contained migration unit. You weren't just going on a holiday, you were taking your entire village and its future with you. Right. Everyone aboard the good ship hope we packed enough coconuts. The chief might call out. Remember, the pigs go in the port hull, the chickens in the starboard, and for goodness sake, someone make sure Uncle Maui doesn't try to navigate using only his collection of unusually shaped seashells again. We've talked about this. The construction of these canoes was a masterpiece of Stone Age technology and craftsmanship. As Polynesians traditionally did not have metal tools until European contact, the massive tree trunks for the hulls would be felled and shaped using stone adzes, fire, and an immense amount of patient labor. Planks might be added to the sides of the dugout hulls to increase their height freeboard, meticulously stitched or lashed together with senet, strong cordage made from braided coconut husk fibers. These lashings were not just functional, they were often incredibly intricate and beautiful, a testament to the skill of the canoe builders. The entire structure had to be both immensely strong to withstand the stresses of ocean waves, and yet flexible enough to absorb their impact. There were no nails or screws. Everything was bound, lashed, and fitted with an incredible precision that allowed the canoe to almost breathe with the ocean. A central platform or deck, built across the two hulls, provided space for the crew, passengers, and cargo, as well as a sheltered area. Perhaps a small hut or covering made of woven pandanus leaves. For protection from the sun and rain, steering was accomplished with one or more large steering paddles or oars, often requiring considerable strength and skill, especially in heavy seas. And then there were the sails. Polynesian voyaging canoes were typically equipped with one or two masts, supporting large triangular or crab claw-shaped sails, woven from pandanus leaves or other plant fibers. These sails were remarkably efficient, allowing the canoes to sail not only with the wind, but also, to a significant degree, against it, or at least at an angle to it, enabling them to make progress towards a desired destination, even if the winds weren't perfectly favorable. The exact speed and upwind sailing capabilities of these ancient canoes, particularly in varying sea conditions, are still subjects of experimental archaeology with replica voyages like that of the Hokulea and computational modeling. But it's clear they were far more than just simple downwind drifters. They were sophisticated sailing machines, the product of deep empirical knowledge of aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, a quirky, though vitally important feature of these canoes was the constant need for bailing. Even the best-built wooden vessel, lashed together with fiber, would inevitably take on some water in the open ocean. Bailers, often carved wooden scoops or even coconut shells, would have been in constant use on a long voyage, a rhythmic, shared labor essential for keeping the canoe afloat. It's like having a car with a very slow, very persistent leak. You can still get where you're going, but someone always needs to be on bucket duty. The canoe was more than just a vehicle, it was a sacred object, a symbol of the community's connection to the ocean, its ancestors, and its destiny. The building of a new voyaging canoe would often be accompanied by complex rituals and ceremonies, from the selection of the trees in the forest to its final launching into the sea. Specific parts of the canoe might be named, or imbued with spiritual significance. It was a living entity, a trusted partner in the great adventure of oceanic exploration. The knowledge of how to build these magnificent vessels was passed down through generations of master canoe builders, an oral tradition of immense skill and precision. Every joint, every lashing, every curve of the hull was the result of centuries of trial and error, of lessons learned from successful voyages and, no doubt, from tragic failures. So, as you feel the gentle sway of this double-hulled marvel beneath your feet, the wind filling its pandanus sail, the vast Pacific stretching out before you, take a moment to appreciate the sheer ingenuity it represents. This is not a primitive craft. It is a highly evolved, perfectly adapted instrument of exploration, a testament to a people who dared to make the world's largest ocean their highway, their home, and their legacy. These were the canoes of wonder that carried a people and their culture to the furthest corners of the earth. You're out on the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean, cradled in the ingenious double-hulled voyaging canoe that is your only home, your only connection to the world of land. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in fleeting hues of orange and purple. And now, as true darkness descends, the heavens above begin to blaze with an almost unimaginable multitude of stars. There are no city lights here to dim their brilliance, no atmospheric haze, just an ocean of infinite blackness above, mirrored by the infinite blackness of the sea below, and you, a tiny speck of humanity, suspended between the two. For the early Polynesian navigator, this breathtaking celestial display wasn't just a beautiful sight, it was their map, their compass, their clock, their most reliable and indispensable guide across the trackless waters. They didn't need a magnetic needle or a printed chart. They carried a star compass within their minds, an intricate, memorized knowledge of the heavens that allowed them to chart their course with astonishing precision. Forget the simple North Star that many land-based Northern Hemisphere cultures relied upon. While Polynesians certainly knew Polaris if their voyages took them far enough north, their system was far more complex and versatile, designed for navigating across vast east-west and north-south distances in both hemispheres. A key historical fact is that Polynesian navigators utilized a conceptual star compass, a mental construct that divided the horizon into 32 or more distinct points, each marked by the rising or setting position of specific stars or constellations. They didn't have a physical instrument with a needle. Instead, they had memorized the precise azimuths, the bearings on the horizon, where key navigational stars would appear and disappear throughout the night. And throughout the changing seasons of the year, it's like having an incredibly detailed, mentally projected compass rose superimposed onto the real horizon, with each point illuminated by a familiar stellar friend. Right, the navigator might murmur to himself, as the first stars begin to prick the twilight. There's Hokupa Polaris, if in the north holding steady, and that's the belt of Kakaumakali'i, Orion's belt, just clearing the eastern horizon. We're holding a good course for now. Just need to make sure Uncle Maui doesn't mistake Venus for a particularly aggressive firefly again and try to steer towards it. To maintain a straight course over many days and nights, the navigator would select a sequence of stars that rose or set along their desired bearing. As one steering star climbed too high in the sky to be a reliable directional marker, or dipped below the horizon, the navigator would seamlessly switch to the next star in the memorized sequence that was rising or setting at that same precise point on their mental compass. It was a celestial game of connect the dots, played out across the dome of heaven, ensuring their canoe held its intended path through the long hours of darkness. This required an encyclopedic knowledge of hundreds of stars, their paths across the sky at different latitudes and times of year, and their relationships to one another. Determining latitude, their north-south position, was equally ingenious. While they didn't have sextants to measure the angle of celestial bodies above the horizon in degrees, they used zenith stars. A zenith star is one that, at a particular latitude, will pass directly overhead at its highest point, its culmination. Experienced Polynesian navigators had memorized which specific bright stars culminated directly over their home island, and over other known islands or island groups. By observing which star passed overhead at night, or how high a known guiding star climbed in the sky relative to their memorized home position, they could get a remarkably accurate sense of their latitude. If their target island's zenith star was appearing too far to the north or south of their own zenith, they knew they needed to adjust their course accordingly. It's like having a series of invisible celestial latitude lines drawn across the sky, each marked by a specific overhead star. The navigator might observe, the sacred star of Hiva, their home island, is a bit lower tonight than it should be if we were on course for Whenua and Nata, the Marquesas. We've drifted south? Better tell the steersman to aim a bit more towards the beak of Manu, a bird-shaped constellation when it rises. A quirky and rather beautiful aspect of this system was the way it integrated practical navigation with mythology and cosmology. Stars weren't just abstract points of light, they were often seen as gods, ancestors, or legendary heroes, their movements across the sky telling stories, their appearance heralding seasons or important events. This rich layer of myth and oral tradition would have aided in the memorization of the vast amounts of astronomical data required. Learning the star compass wasn't just rote learning, it was an immersion in the sacred narratives and ancestral wisdom of their people. This knowledge was passed down through generations, from master navigator to apprentice, through rigorous oral instruction, chants, songs, and hands-on practice during actual voyages. The training was incredibly demanding, often starting in childhood. The apprentice would spend years learning to identify hundreds of stars, memorizing their paths, their seasonal appearances, their connections to specific islands and sea routes. They would also learn to feel the canoe's orientation relative to the stars, even on cloudy nights when only a few key stars might peek through, or when they had to rely on other cues like swells and winds, using the stars as their primary reference when visible. The precise number of stars and the complexity of the mental star compasses used by different Polynesian groups across the vast Pacific, and how this knowledge was specifically taught and preserved without written texts, are still being reconstructed by researchers, often through a combination of early ethnographic accounts, linguistic analysis, and the invaluable efforts of modern cultural revivalists and traditional navigators. What is clear is that it was a system of extraordinary sophistication, perfectly adapted to its purpose. And what happened on those inevitable cloudy nights when the stars were obscured? This is where the navigator's other skills, reading the swells, the winds, the flight of birds, would become even more crucial, as we'll explore. But the stars remained their ultimate, unwavering reference, their celestial map. When the clouds parted, even for a moment, the navigator would eagerly scan the heavens, reorienting themselves, confirming their course, their mind a living planetarium, their memory a library of celestial pathways. The star compass path, drawn in the navigator's mind and reflected in the vast Pacific sky, was the golden thread that guided these ancient voyagers across the ocean's seemingly featureless void, towards unseen lands, and into the very heart of human history. The vast, star-dusted canopy of the Pacific night has been your unerring guide, your celestial compass leading you across the dark waters. But what happens when the heavens are obscured, when thick clouds roll in, or when the relentless tropical sun bleaches the sky, making stellar navigation impossible during daylight hours? Do you, as an early Polynesian navigator, simply drift aimlessly, hoping for the best? Not at all. For you possess another, equally profound and perhaps even more subtle, set of skills: the ability to read the very rhythms of the ocean itself, to interpret the complex song of the swells, those long, rolling undulations of the sea that carry messages from distant storms and unseen islands. This isn't just about feeling seasick. This is about a deeply intuitive and highly trained understanding of wave dynamics, a way of navigating by feeling the very pulse of the great Moana. First, you need to understand what these navigators were reading. Ocean swells are different from the choppy, localized wind waves that are created by the immediate weather conditions around your canoe. Swells are long-period waves, often with crests hundreds of meters apart, generated by storm systems far, far away, sometimes thousands of miles across the ocean. These swells travel vast distances with a remarkable consistency of direction and period, their energy dissipating very slowly. A key historical fact is that in the open Pacific, there are often several different swell patterns present simultaneously, coming from different directions, generated by different distant weather systems. The Polynesian navigator learned to identify these primary, underlying swells, to distinguish them from the more chaotic surface chop, and to use their consistent direction as a kind of oceanic compass, especially when the stars were hidden, or during the day when only the sun, which is also a crucial guide, of course, was visible. It's like being able to feel the deep, underlying bass notes of the ocean's symphony, even when there's a lot of distracting surface noise. Ah, yes, the navigator might murmur, feeling the gentle lift and fall of the canoe. That long, slow roller from the southeast, that's old reliable. Our friend from the winter storms off Aotearoa. She'll keep us true, even if that pesky sun decides to play hide and seek behind those clouds all day. But the true genius of Polynesian swell navigation went far beyond simply identifying a dominant swell direction. Their most sophisticated skill lay in detecting and interpreting the subtle ways in which these deep ocean swells were affected by the presence of land, even land that was still far below the horizon, completely invisible to the naked eye. This is where the art verged on what seemed like magic to early European observers. One crucial phenomenon they understood was swell refraction. As a deep ocean swell approaches an island or an atoll, even a relatively small one, the part of the wavefront that encounters the shallower water near the island's submerged slopes begins to slow down due to friction with the seabed. The part of the wavefront still in deep water continues at its original speed. This difference in speed causes the swell pattern to bend, or refract, around the island, much like light waves bend when passing through a lens. An experienced navigator, by carefully observing the direction from which these refracted swells were coming, and how their pattern differed from the underlying deep ocean swell, could detect the presence of an island long before it was visible, and even get a sense of its direction. It's like being able to see the invisible shadow or footprint of an island on the very surface of the ocean. Then there was swell reflection. When a swell encounters a steep coastline or a reef, some of its energy can be reflected back out to sea, creating a counterswell or a confused pattern of waves. By recognizing these reflected wave patterns and their direction relative to the primary swell, the navigator could again gain clues about the proximity and bearing of land. And perhaps most remarkably, they understood the concept of the zone of confused seas that often exists in the lee of an island, the side sheltered from the primary swell. Here, the primary swell might be blocked or significantly diminished, while refracted swells curling around the island from both sides, and perhaps some reflected swells from the island itself, or even from neighboring islands, would interact to create a distinctive, often calmer but more complex, wave pattern. This zone of relative calm, or a specific pattern of interacting swells, could indicate that land was very near, even if it was still shrouded in mist or just below the horizon. It's like the ocean itself was whispering, "Psst, hey, navigator land ahoy, just over there where the waves are doing that funny little dance. You're welcome." A quirky and rather awe-inspiring aspect of this skill was the navigator's ability to feel these subtle wave patterns through the very hull of their canoe, and sometimes even through their own bodies. Some accounts suggest that master navigators would sometimes lie down in the bottom of the canoe, or even dangle sensitive parts of their anatomy like their testicles, according to some rather specific but perhaps apocryphal traditions in the water, to better sense the minute changes in the canoe's motion, the pitch, the roll, the yaw, caused by these intersecting swell patterns. This required an incredibly developed kinesthetic sense, an ability to become one with the vessel and the ocean, to feel the invisible topography of the sea floor and the presence of distant islands through the subtle language of the waves. The precise methodology and precision with which ancient navigators could distinguish and interpret very faint or complex overlapping swell patterns in variable sea conditions, especially over very long distances, remains a subject of deep fascination and ongoing study, often involving collaborations between traditional navigators, oceanographers, and physicists. This knowledge wasn't just picked up on a weekend sailing course. It was the result of a lifetime of observation, of memorization, and of oral tradition, passed down from master to apprentice through chance, stories, and practical experience on countless voyages. They would have mental maps of how the dominant swells interacted with known island chains, creating predictable patterns that could be followed from one island group to another, So, as your voyaging canoe glides through the seemingly featureless expanse of the Pacific, remember that for the Polynesian Navigator, the ocean surface itself is a dynamic, ever-changing map, filled with information. The stars above provide the grand celestial highways, but the swells below offer a more intimate, tactile, and constant stream of guidance. A subtle song of the sea whose rhythms, if you have the skill to listen, can lead you safely home or to new, undiscovered shores. The ocean isn't just a void to be crossed, it's a living, breathing entity, speaking its secrets to those who know how to feel its pulse. You are far out on the vast Pacific, your Polynesian voyaging canoe a tiny speck in an immense universe of water and sky. The stars have been your celestial compass. The ocean swells your subtle, rhythmic guide. But the art of Polynesian wayfinding was a truly holistic science, relying not just on these grand, overarching systems, but also on a keen, almost preternatural sensitivity to a myriad of other, often much more subtle natural clues. As you journey with your expert navigator, you begin to appreciate how they wove together observations of the wind, the clouds, the behavior of seabirds, and even the very color and scent of the air and water, into a rich, multi-sensory tapestry of information that could lead them, with astonishing accuracy, to those tiny, scattered island destinations. This wasn't just about looking up at the stars or down at the waves. It was about being completely, utterly attuned to every whisper, every nuance of the ocean world. First, let's consider the wind. For a sailing canoe, understanding the wind is, of course, paramount. Polynesian navigators possessed a deep empirical knowledge of prevailing wind patterns, like the steady trade winds that blow across much of the Pacific. They knew the seasonal variations in these winds, their typical strengths, and how they might shift in different parts of the ocean or at different times of day. This knowledge was crucial for planning voyages and for maintaining a course when other cues, like stars, might be obscured, but they also paid close attention to more localized wind shifts. As a canoe approaches a large island, particularly a high volcanic one, the island itself can disrupt the prevailing wind patterns, creating eddies, calms, or even localized breezes that blow offshore in the early morning, as the land cools faster than the sea, or onshore in the afternoon as the land heats up. An experienced navigator, feeling these subtle changes in wind direction or strength, could infer the presence and approximate bearing of nearby land, even if it was still out of sight. It's like having an invisible weather vane that also whispers, "Psst, land that way, and it's probably going to have some lovely, cool land breezes tonight if you get a bit closer." Then there are the clouds. To most of us, clouds are just clouds, pretty or ominous, but generally just part of the skyscape. To a Polynesian navigator, however, clouds were another vital page in their natural book of wayfinding. A key historical fact, confirmed by modern navigators who have studied and revived these ancient techniques, is their understanding of how islands, especially high islands, can affect cloud formations. A large island often generates its own cloud cap, a stationary bank of clouds that tends to form over or slightly downwind of the land, even when the surrounding sky is clear and young. This happens because the landmass heats up during the day, causing warm, moist air to rise and condense, or because moisture-laden winds are forced upwards by the island's topography. By spotting these distinctive, often lens-shaped or piled-up, stationary cloud formations on the distant horizon, a navigator could identify the presence of land long before the island itself was visible. They also observed the color of the underside of clouds. Clouds reflecting the greenish hue of shallow lagoons, or the darker color of dense vegetation could indicate land beneath, as opposed to clouds reflecting only the deep blue of the open ocean. "Look yonder, apprentice." The navigator might point. "See how that small cloud to the west holds its place, even as the wind whispers, and does its belly not carry a faint, greenish blush?" Our destination, or at least a very promising T-stop, lies in that direction. And what about the birds? Seabirds were the Polynesian navigators' winged scouts, their flight paths often providing invaluable clues to the direction of land. Different species of seabirds have different foraging ranges and nesting habits. Some, like terns, boobies, or noddies, are primarily coastal or inshore feeders, typically roosting on land at night. If a navigator saw these types of birds flying purposefully in a particular direction in the late afternoon, they could be reasonably certain that land lay in that direction, within the bird's return to roosting range. Conversely, seeing these same birds flying out from a certain direction at dawn would also indicate the bearing of their home island. A quirky, and rather clever, aspect of this was noting not just the direction of flight, but also whether the bird was carrying fish in its beak, indicating it was returning to feed its young on land or flying empty. Perhaps heading out to forage. Other birds, like frigate birds or albatrosses, are pelagic, capable of spending long periods far out at sea. So their presence was less indicative of nearby land, though their behavior could still offer clues about weather patterns or the presence of fish schools, which might, in turn, relate to upwellings near seamounts or islands. Some accounts even suggest that navigators might have carried caged, course-finding birds, like frigate birds, releasing them when they believed they were near land. If the bird circled and returned to the canoe, land was still distant, but if it flew off purposefully in one direction, it was a good sign to follow. That white tern is heading purposefully towards the setting sun, and it looks like it's in a hurry to get home for dinner. The navigator might observe, "Let's see if its dinner reservation is on the island we're looking for." Beyond these major cues, Polynesian navigators were attuned to a host of other, even more subtle signs. The color and temperature of the seawater could change as one approached land, due to runoff from rivers, the presence of shallow reefs or different currents. Floating debris, a stray log, a coconut, a branch of vegetation could indicate that land was not too far away, and the type of debris might even hint at the kind of island. The smell of the air could also carry clues: the scent of damp earth, decaying vegetation, or wood smoke on the breeze could be detected from a surprising distance downwind of an island. Even the presence of certain types of phosphorescence or bioluminescence in the water at night might be interpreted as a sign. The exact effective range at which navigators could reliably detect land using phenomena like stationary cloud formations. Specific bird flight paths or subtle changes in water characteristics is still a subject of some discussion, and depends heavily on weather conditions, island size, and the navigator's own acuity. But what is undeniable is that these wayfinders possessed an extraordinary ability to synthesize information from a multitude of natural sources, cross-referencing different signs, constantly observing, feeling, and interpreting their environment. Their daily life at sea was one of unceasing vigilance and profound sensory engagement, a continuous dialogue with the ocean and the sky, reading the subtle whispers of nature to find their way across the vast Pacific void. You're now deeply immersed in the world of the Polynesian wayfinder, surrounded by the subtle cues of the ocean, the rhythm of the swells, the whisper of the wind, the flight of distant birds, the guiding light of the stars. You've seen the incredible array of natural signs that used to navigate the vast Pacific. But this profound knowledge, this intricate tapestry of observational science and intuitive understanding, wasn't just picked up casually, like learning a new fishing spot. It was the result of a long, arduous, and deeply revered system of education. A navigator's path that transformed a promising young apprentice into a master wayfinder, capable of guiding their people across thousands of miles of open ocean to find tiny, unseen island destinations. This wasn't your average school, with blackboards and textbooks. This was a school where the classroom was the boundless ocean. The teachers were the master navigators in the very elements themselves, and the final exam could literally mean life or death for everyone on board the canoe. The selection of a young person to embark on this demanding path was likely a careful process. Not everyone was deemed suitable. A prospective navigator would need more than just a good memory. They would require exceptional powers of observation, a keen intuition, a calm demeanor in the face of danger. immense patience, physical stamina, and perhaps a certain spiritual attunement to the natural world. Often, this knowledge was passed down within specific families or lineages, the secrets of wayfinding guarded as a precious ancestral heritage. Imagine a wise old master navigator, his eyes like the deep ocean itself, carefully observing the children of his village, looking for that spark, that innate curiosity about the stars, that almost unconscious ability to sense the subtle shifts in the canoe's motion. That young Keanu, he might murmur to another elder. He spends more time gazing at the night sky than at his taro patch, and he seems to know which way the wind will blow before even the frigate birds do. He has the signs. Perhaps it is time his training began. The apprenticeship would start at a very young age, often in early childhood. The first lessons wouldn't involve complex star charts, but simply learning to see, to feel, to listen to the ocean environment with an acuity that most of us can barely imagine. The apprentice would spend countless hours on the water, in small fishing canoes or accompanying short, inter-island voyages, learning the names of the winds, the colors of the water, the feel of different wave patterns, the habits of local sea creatures. They would be taught to observe the sun's path throughout the day, the changing position of the stars throughout the night and across the seasons. A key historical fact is that much of this knowledge was encoded and transmitted through complex oral traditions. Chants, songs, epic poems, genealogies of islands, and elaborate mythologies that contained vital navigational information within their narratives. It was a vast, memorized library of sea lore. You didn't just learn a list of star names, you learned the stories of the gods and heroes who became those stars, their movements across the sky mirroring their mythical journeys. It's like learning your multiplication tables, but instead of boring old numbers, it's an epic saga involving demigods, magic fish hooks, and islands being fished up from the bottom of the sea. Much more memorable, I'd imagine. As the apprentice progressed, the training would become more rigorous and more specialized. They would learn the mental star compass we've discussed, memorizing the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars and constellations, and how these related to different island bearings. They would be taught to identify and interpret the subtle patterns of ocean swells. The primary swell from a distant storm, the refracted swells bending around an unseen island, the reflected swells bouncing off a coastline, the confused seas in the lee of land. This often involves spending long periods lying in the hull of the canoe, literally feeling the different motions of the vessel through their body, learning to distinguish one tiny, almost imperceptible shift from another. They would also learn the itak system, or similar concepts known by different names in various Polynesian cultures. This was a sophisticated mental construct for judging distance and progress on a voyage. The navigator would choose an itak island, a reference island that was off to one side of their course, often below the horizon. By observing the changing bearing of certain guiding stars relative to this imagined itak island as the canoe sailed forward, the navigator could mentally divide the journey into segments and estimate how far they had traveled and how far they still had to go. It was a brilliant system of dynamic mental triangulation, requiring immense concentration and a perfectly calibrated internal clock and compass. Right! Apprentice, the master might say. The star Hikinalia has now moved from directly over the peak of our Itak Island, Fatu Hiva, to 3 finger widths to its left. What does that tell us about our progress towards the sacred marae on Raiatea? And no, lunchtime is not the correct answer, though I admire your optimism. A quirky, though essential, part of the training might involve specific mnemonic devices, perhaps using parts of the canoe itself, or even the navigator's own body, as a kind of physical star chart or bearing indicator. Certain hand positions held against the horizon, or alignments with specific canoe stanchions, could help to measure star altitudes or maintain a steady course. The culmination of this long and arduous training would often involve a formal initiation, a rite of passage where the apprentice, having proven their skill and knowledge on numerous voyages under the guidance of their master, would finally be recognized as a Puapikio, a fully fledged master navigator, entrusted with the sacred responsibility of guiding their people across the ocean. This was a position of immense honor and respect within Polynesian society, but also one of heavy burden. The lives of everyone on board the canoe depended on the navigator's skill, their knowledge, their judgment, and their unwavering composure in the face of often terrifying dangers. The precise pedagogical methods used in these deeply oral traditions, and how such vast amounts of complex astronomical, oceanographic, and geographical information were so accurately memorized, synthesized, and transmitted across many generations without the aid of written texts or mathematical instruments, continue to inspire profound research and admiration among anthropologists, cognitive scientists, and historians of science. It speaks to a different kind of intellectual rigor, one based on holistic observation, deep memory, and an intimate, embodied understanding of the natural world. So, as you imagine that young Polynesian apprentice, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and intense concentration, listening to the master navigator chant the ancient star paths, feeling the subtle language of the swells through the hull of the canoe, and gradually building that vast, intricate mental map of the ocean, you are witnessing the forging of a truly extraordinary human skill. This was the navigator's path, a journey of learning that was as deep, as challenging, and as boundless as the great Pacific Ocean itself. You're now deep in the world of the Polynesian apprentice navigator, their mind a burgeoning repository of ancient sea lore, their senses becoming ever more keenly attuned to the subtle language of the stars, the swells, and the winds. We've seen how this knowledge was passed down through rigorous oral tradition and hands-on experience. But how did they actually organize this vast amount of information? How did they map the boundless ocean and its scattered islands without the aid of pen, paper, or printed charts? The answer lies in the incredible power of human memory, structured and reinforced by sophisticated mnemonic systems. Elaborate chants, epic poems, and intricate genealogies of islands, all combining to create a dynamic, three-dimensional map of the ocean held entirely within the navigator's mind. This wasn't a static drawing on parchment. It was a living, breathing understanding of the sea, constantly updated by observation and experience. Imagine the navigator, the PWO, standing on the deck of the voyaging canoe, the vast Pacific stretching in all directions. They carry no physical charts as a European captain of later centuries would. Their charts are internal, woven from countless memorized star paths, swell patterns, wind directions, and island locations. A key historical fact is that this orally transmitted geographical knowledge was incredibly detailed and systematic. Navigators had to memorize the precise bearings of islands relative to each other, often expressed in terms of the rising or setting points of specific stars on their mental star compass. They would know, for instance, that to get from island A to island B, you would sail towards the rising of star X for a certain number of days, then adjust your course towards the setting of star Y, all while constantly monitoring the prevailing swells and winds for confirmation or correction. It's like having an incredibly complex, multi-layered GPS system embedded directly in your brain, but one that's powered by ancient wisdom and keen observation, not by satellites. And it probably didn't have that annoying voice constantly saying, recalculating route, make a U-turn when possible, preferably before you sail off the edge of the known universe. Chants and songs played an absolutely crucial role in encoding and transmitting this vast corpus of navigational knowledge. These weren't just pleasant sea shanties to pass the time, they were complex mnemonic devices, epic poems, or lengthy recitations that contained detailed information about star courses, swell patterns for specific routes, the locations of islands and atolls often described by their unique characteristics, like the shape of their lagoon, the type of bird life, or the color of their sand. The distances between them perhaps measured in days of sailing under average conditions, and even warnings about dangerous reefs or currents. The rhythm, rhyme, and narrative structure of these chants would aid memorization, allowing this vital information to be passed down accurately from master to apprentice, generation after generation, without the need for written texts. You can almost hear the low, resonant voice of an old navigator, perhaps in the quiet of a canoe house or under the stars on a training voyage, patiently teaching a young apprentice a lengthy chant that describes, with poetic precision, the star path from their home island to a distant archipelago. Remember, child of the sea, when the Pleiades Matariki brush the western wave at sunset, and the Southern Cross Maui's fishhook stands tall above your starboard bow. Then steer by the faint glow of Yanyanuwaru and Terres until the seabirds of Puka Puka greet your dawn. It's both poetry and a highly practical instruction manual. The ATAC system, which we touched upon as a method for judging distance and progress, was also a key component of this mental mapping. By visualizing that unseen reference island off to one side of the course and tracking its apparent movement relative to the background stars as the canoe sailed forward, the navigator could create a dynamic, constantly updated sense of their position within a known block or segment of the ocean. This allowed them to compensate for drift caused by winds or currents, and to know when they were approaching the epoch of discovery, the point at which they should begin to look for the subtle signs of their target island. A quirky and rather fascinating aspect of this mental cartography might have involved the use of genealogies of islands. Just as Polynesian societies often kept meticulous oral records of human genealogies, they sometimes conceptualized islands as being related to each other, perhaps as siblings or descendants, with known paths or connections between them. Learning these island genealogies and their associated stories could be another way of memorizing the complex spatial relationships across vast ocean tracts. Furthermore, the navigator's mental map wasn't just about direction and distance. It also incorporated a deep understanding of seasonal changes. They knew how the visibility and paths of stars changed throughout the year, how prevailing winds and ocean currents shifted with the seasons, and when specific migratory birds would be flying in certain directions. This allowed them to plan their voyages for the most favorable times and to adapt their strategies to changing conditions. The exact cognitive processes involved in constructing and utilizing these complex multisensory mental maps, and how they were kept so remarkably accurate across generations in purely oral cultures, are still areas of intense study and admiration for cognitive psychologists, anthropologists, and navigators themselves. It speaks to a capacity for memory, spatial reasoning, and holistic environmental perception that is almost beyond our modern instrument-reliant comprehension. This internal map was not static. It was constantly being updated by the navigator's direct observations. Every subtle shift in wind, every change in swell pattern, every new star rising on the horizon, every flock of birds sighted, would be integrated into their mental model, allowing them to refine their course and confirm their position. It was a continuous, dynamic process of observation, interpretation, and course correction, all performed without a single written note or mathematical calculation in the way we understand them. So, as you imagine that Polynesian navigator, their eyes scanning the horizon, their body feeling the subtle movements of the canoe, their mind filled with an intricate, invisible chart of stars, swells, and islands, you are witnessing a true master of memory's ocean map. Their knowledge wasn't stored on paper or a hard drive, it was stored in their very being, a living library of sea lore, a testament to the incredible power of the human mind to navigate and comprehend even the most daunting and seemingly featureless of environments. The ocean was not a void to them. It was a book they knew how to read with unparalleled skill. You are now well-versed in the incredible mental toolkit of the early Polynesian navigator, their internalized star compass, their profound understanding of ocean swells, their keen observation of winds, clouds, and birds, and their vast memorized library of sea lore encoded in chants and stories. But what was it actually like to be that navigator on a long, open ocean voyage? What were their daily routines, their hourly responsibilities, their constant focused engagement with the natural world as they guided their voyaging canoe? Their waka huarua, across hundreds, even thousands, of miles of seemingly featureless sea. Step onto the deck. Feel the sun on your face and the spray on your skin. And let's imagine a day and a night At sea, steering by sun, wave, and star. Through the eyes and senses of a master poem, the navigator's day would begin before dawn, while the stars still blazed with preternatural clarity in the cool, dark sky. This was a crucial time for orientation. As the eastern horizon began to pale, the navigator would meticulously observe the rising points of specific steering stars that lay along their intended course, or those that marked their memorized epoch reference island. This pre-dawn celestial observation would set the initial heading for the day's sail. As the sun itself climbed above the horizon, its precise rising point would be noted, providing another vital directional cue. A key historical fact is that Polynesian navigators had a deep understanding of the sun's seasonal path along the horizon, its changing declination throughout the year, and they could use its position at sunrise, noon to get a rough sense of latitude by its height, and sunset to maintain their bearing and track their progress. It wasn't just sun up, sun down, it was a precise moving celestial marker. Ra, the sun god, rises precisely from that notch between the two distant cloud banks today. The navigator might note to their apprentice, just as the chance foretold for this season on this path, we are well. For now, let's just hope he doesn't decide to take an unexpected detour for his lunch break. Throughout the daylight hours, with the stars hidden by the sun's glare, the navigator would rely on a continuous synthesis of other clues. The sun itself, casting shadows from the mast or other parts of the canoe, would provide a constant, though shifting, directional reference. The wind, its direction and strength carefully monitored, was crucial for setting the sails and maintaining the desired angle of travel. The navigator would be acutely aware of the prevailing trade winds, but also sensitive to any subtle shifts that might indicate changing weather patterns or the distant influence of land. And then there were the ocean swells, those long, rolling messengers from distant storms. Even in broad daylight, an experienced navigator could feel and interpret these underlying rhythms of the sea. They would observe the direction of the primary swell or swells, as there were often multiple patterns present, using it as a kind of oceanic compass. They would also be constantly vigilant for the more subtle signs of refracted or reflected swells that might indicate the presence of an unseen island, or the zone of confused seas in an island's lee. This wasn't just a visual observation, it was a profound kinesthetic sense, feeling the way the canoe lifted, pitched, and rolled as it interacted with these different wave patterns. Some accounts suggest that navigators would spend time lying in the hull of the canoe, or even trailing a hand in the water, to better sense these minute variations in the ocean's pulse. It's like having a built-in, highly sensitive motion detector that's also a long-range island finder. The canoe feels a little hesitant today, the navigator might remark. The swell from the east is strong, but there's a faint counter-rhythm from the north-northwest, a little whisper that wasn't there yesterday. Perhaps our target island is beginning to make its presence known, even if it's still too shy to show its face. Cloud formations, as we've discussed, would be another constant focus of daytime observation. Those stationary cloud pillars that often form over islands, or the greenish tint on the underside of clouds reflecting shallow lagoons, were vital clues. The flight paths of land-roosting seabirds, heading out to forage in the morning or returning to their nests in the evening, would be meticulously noted, their direction providing a clear pointer towards land within their flying range. A quirky, and perhaps surprisingly effective, method sometimes mentioned is observing the behavior of marine life. Certain types of fish or even marine mammals might be more prevalent near islands or along specific currents that could guide a canoe. And of course, any floating debris, a coconut, a tree branch, a tangle of seaweed, would be eagerly scrutinized as a potential sign of nearby land. The navigator wasn't just passively observing these signs, they were actively interpreting them, cross-referencing them, building a dynamic mental picture of their position and progress. Their role was one of immense concentration and constant vigilance. They might not be the ones physically steering the canoe all the time, that task would fall to skilled eastern steersmen, following the navigator's precise instructions, nor would they necessarily be involved in the daily chores of managing sails or bailing water. Their primary responsibility was mental: to hold the course, to read the signs, to make the critical decisions that would guide the canoe safely to its destination. They were the living embodiment of the voyage's memory and its future path. As dusk approached, the navigator would prepare for the crucial transition back to stellar navigation. They would observe the precise setting point of the sun, and then, as the first stars appeared, they would re-establish their celestial bearings, picking up their sequence of steering stars for the night ahead. The degree of precision with which these ancient navigators could hold a course over many days and nights, using only these natural signs and their memorized knowledge, especially when facing adverse weather or strong currents, is a testament to their extraordinary skill and generations of accumulated experience. Though the exact margins of error are still subjects of careful study and sometimes debate, throughout the long hours of the night, the navigator, or a trusted apprentice under their supervision, would keep watch, ensuring the canoe stayed true to its guiding stars, feeling the rhythm of the swells, listening to the song of the wind in the pendanus sails. It was a life lived in profound intimacy with the ocean and the cosmos, a daily dance of observation, interpretation, and unwavering trust in the ancient sea lore passed down through the ages. Each sunrise was a confirmation, each starry night a renewed promise. On the long, watery path to a distant, unseen shore, days, perhaps even weeks, have passed since your Polynesian voyaging canoe last saw the comforting sight of land. You've been a tiny, self-contained world, navigating by the grand celestial clockwork of the stars, the subtle rhythmic language of the ocean's swells, and the ever-shifting breath of the wind. The navigator, that master of ancient sea lore, has held the course with unwavering skill, their mind a living chart of this vast watery expanse. But now a new tension, a heightened sense of anticipation, begins to ripple through the vessel. The navigator's calculations, their reading of the ETAC segments, their intuitive feel for the canoe's progress, all suggest that your destination, that tiny, unseen island pinpoint on the immense blue canvas of the Pacific, should be drawing near. This is the critical phase of landfall, where all the navigator's senses are strained to their utmost, searching for those subtle, often elusive signs that whisper of solid earth hidden just beyond the horizon. As you approach the anticipated vicinity of an island, the navigator's observations become even more intense, more focused. They are no longer just maintaining a general course, they are actively hunting for land, scanning the ocean and sky for nature's telltale clues. Remember those land-roosting seabirds, like terns, noddies, or boobies, whose flight paths offered directional hints now? Their behavior becomes even more significant. A key historical fact, crucial for Polynesian landfinding, is that these birds have a limited foraging range from their home island. Seeing them in increasing numbers, or observing them flying with a purposeful, unwavering direction towards a specific point on the horizon in the late afternoon as they return to roost, or fanning out from that same point at dawn as they head out to fish, becomes a very strong indicator that land is within a day's sail, or even closer. The navigator might even note if the birds are carrying fish in their beaks, a sure sign they are heading back to feed their young on a nearby shore. It's like nature's own air traffic control system, and the navigator is an expert at reading its flight schedules. "Look there, apprentice," the navigator might exclaim, a new urgency in their voice. "See those white terns, flying low and fast towards the setting sun? Their bellies are full. Their nests, and our destination, cannot be far beyond that horizon. Prepare the celebratory coconuts, but don't crack them open just yet. Overconfidence is the reef upon which many a good voyage has foundered." Cloud formations also take on a new significance as landfall approaches. That stationary cloud cap, or cloud palal of ETR, which can form over a high island, caused by rising warm air or moisture-laden winds being forced upwards, will become larger, more defined, more persistent as you draw nearer. The navigator would scan the horizon for these telltale anchors in the sky, and the color of the underside of clouds, as we've touched upon, becomes even more critical. A faint greenish tinge reflected from a shallow lagoon, or a darker, more earthy hue from dense vegetation, can be a subtle but reliable sign of land beneath, even when the island itself is still hidden by distance, haze, or the curvature of the earth. The very state of the ocean can begin to change as you approach an island group. The navigator, with their exquisitely developed feel for swell patterns, might detect a more confused sea state, a subtle interference pattern where the long ocean swells are being reflected, or blocked by the presence of an unseen landmass in its surrounding reefs. The zone of confused seas in the lee of an island, where the water is often calmer but the wave patterns more complex, can be a clear indicator that you are very close. They might also notice changes in water color, a subtle shift from the deep indigo of the open ocean to a lighter, perhaps slightly greener or even cloudier, hue as the water becomes shallower or carries sediment from land. Some accounts even suggest that highly skilled navigators could detect faint changes in water temperature or even salinity if they were passing near an island with significant freshwater runoff. And then there are the scents and sounds carried on the wind. On a quiet night, with a favorable breeze, the navigator might detect the faint, sweet smell of damp earth, decaying vegetation, or even wood smoke from cooking fires, sometimes from many miles away. These olfactory clues, however elusive, would be a powerful confirmation that land was near. The distant cry of land-based birds, or even as you get very close, the sound of surf breaking on a reef or shore, would be music to the ears of a weary crew. It's like that moment when you're driving home after a very long trip, and you suddenly smell your mom's famous apple pie baking, or hear the familiar bark of your neighbor's annoyingly yappy but reassuringly home-like dog. You just know you're almost there. A quirky, though perhaps less scientifically verifiable tidbit sometimes mentioned in voyaging lore is the navigator's ability to feel the presence of land, a kind of sixth sense developed through a lifetime of oceanic attunement. Or perhaps they might interpret certain dreams or omens as signs of impending landfall. While modern science might be skeptical, in a world where survival depended on such acute sensory awareness and intuitive interpretation, these less tangible factors may well have played a role in the navigator's confidence and decision-making. The exact effective range at which these various subtle landfinding clues, like the smell of vegetation, specific bird behaviors, or very faint changes in swell patterns, could be reliably detected and interpreted by ancient Polynesian navigators is still a subject of some discussion and depends heavily on environmental conditions, island characteristics, and the extraordinary, almost legendary acuity of the individual wayfinder. As these signs accumulate, as the promise of landfall grows stronger, a palpable excitement, mixed with a focused intensity, would spread through the canoe. The navigator would be at their most alert, cross-referencing every clue, constantly updating their mental position, guiding the steersman with precise instructions. And then, finally, that magical moment, a cry from the lookout. Whenua, whenua, land, land. As a dark smudge on the horizon, or the distant peak of a volcanic island, or the feathery tops of coconut palms, finally breaks the endless monotony of sea and sky. The relief, the joy, the sheer triumph of that moment, after days or weeks of uncertainty on the open ocean, is almost impossible for us to fully comprehend. It's not just the sighting of a geographical feature, it's the reaffirmation of an ancient skill, the successful culmination of a courageous journey, and the promise of fresh water, food, and a place to once again feel solid earth beneath their feet. The landfall wasn't just an arrival, it was a victory of human ingenuity and spirit over the vastness of the Pacific void. The cry of whenua, whenua, land, land, has echoed across the deck of your Polynesian voyaging canoe, a sound of immense relief and joyous triumph. After long, uncertain days or weeks at sea, the navigator's incredible skill, their intimate knowledge of stars, swells, winds, and 100 other subtle signs has once again proven true, guiding you safely to this new shore, perhaps a lush volcanic island wreathed in mist, or a low-lying coral atoll shimmering in the tropical sun. But as you prepare to make landfall, to feel the unfamiliar sensation of solid earth beneath your feet, you might begin to wonder what was the ultimate purpose of these extraordinary, often perilous voyages. What drove these ancient mariners to repeatedly launch themselves into the vast, intimidating unknown of the Pacific Ocean? It wasn't just for a casual holiday cruise or a bit of adventurous sightseeing, though a spirit of adventure undoubtedly played its part. The motivations behind these epic Polynesian voyages were complex and multifaceted, rooted in the fundamental human drives for survival, expansion, connection, and perhaps a touch of that insatiable curiosity that pushes us to see what lies beyond the horizon. The primary driver for many of the most significant and far-reaching Polynesian voyages, particularly during the great eastward expansion that settled the remote corners of the Polynesian Triangle Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Aotearoa, was undoubtedly colonization, the deliberate search for and settlement of new, uninhabited or sparsely populated islands. Imagine your home island, perhaps growing a little crowded, its resources becoming strained by a rising population. Or maybe internal political tensions are making life a bit uncomfortable for certain chiefly lineages. The oral traditions, the chants of the navigators, might speak of distant legendary lands, of islands of plenty hidden beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered. And so a decision is made. A great voyaging canoe, or perhaps a small fleet of them, is provisioned not just for a journey, but for establishing a new life. A key historical fact is that these voyaging canoes were essentially floating arks, carrying not just people, but everything needed to create a new, self-sufficient community. The Polynesian toolkit of essential food plants like taro, yams, breadfruit, bananas, sugarcane, and coconuts, all carefully transported as cuttings, tubers, or seeds. Domesticated animals like pigs, dogs, and chickens, the unholy trinity of Polynesian livestock, ready to provide protein and companionship. Though perhaps not always in that order, vital tools made of stone, bone, and shell, and of course the intangible but equally crucial cargo of cultural knowledge. Social structures, religious beliefs, and the navigational wisdom to potentially make return voyages or guide future settlers. It's like moving house, but your new neighborhood is a tiny, uncharted dot on a map thousands of miles away. And you have to bring literally everything, including your own building materials and your grumpy Uncle Paka, who always complains about the quality of the fermented breadfruit. Are you sure there's good taro-growing soil on this mythical island of perpetual sunshine? Navigator, because my prize-winning pig, Petunia, looks distinctly unimpressed by this endless salty water. Beyond initial colonization, maintaining contact, trade, and exchange between already settled island groups was another significant motivation for voyaging. While the vast distances often made regular, large-scale commerce difficult, there is clear archaeological and linguistic evidence for inter-island and inter-archipelago connections. Valuable resources that were scarce or absent on one island might be obtained from another. Fine-grained basalt for adze making, high-quality obsidian for cutting tools, colorful feathers for ceremonial cloaks, or perhaps even specific types of building timber or canoe logs. Marriage alliances between chiefly families on different islands also necessitated voyaging, helping to cement political bonds and maintain genetic diversity. These weren't just casual visits. They were vital for the social, economic, and political health of these scattered island communities. The sheer spirit of exploration and adventure, the desire to see what lay beyond the known world, must also have played a part. Polynesian societies often revered skilled navigators and courageous voyagers, their deeds celebrated in epic chants and stories. For a young, ambitious individual, undertaking a long and dangerous voyage to a new or little-known island could be a way to gain immense prestige, to prove their worth, and perhaps even to establish their own new chiefly lineage. It was the ultimate rite of passage, a test of skill, endurance, and courage against the boundless ocean. Sometimes voyages might have been spurred by less glorious, more pressing push factors from the home island. Population pressure leading to resource scarcity, as mentioned, could certainly be a motivator. So too could internal political conflict, defeat in warfare, or even exile. A vanquished chief and his followers might be forced to take to their canoes and seek a new home elsewhere, carrying with them their hopes, their gods, and their navigational knowledge. Perhaps vowing to return one day, or simply to find a new place in the sun where they could rebuild their lives. A quirky, though perhaps not entirely verifiable, aspect of some oral traditions involves stories of navigators who, after some social transgression or political dispute, were sent on what amounted to a one-way voyage of no return. Their skill used to find a new, distant exile for themselves and their followers. Well, Chief Hokulani, the elders might say, your attempt to declare yourself supreme overlord of all coconuts was ambitious, but ultimately unsuccessful. As a token of our esteem for your past services and as a way to ensure you don't try it again here, we've provisioned you a very fine canoe and pointed you towards that rather intriguing-looking star cluster that sets in the direction of absolutely nowhere we know of. Bon voyage, and do send a frigate bird if you find anything interesting. Or not. The relative importance of these various push factors like population pressure or conflict versus pull, factors like the lure of new resources, the desire for prestige, or simply the spirit of adventure in motivating these incredibly ambitious and often perilous long-distance Polynesian migrations is a complex question that continues to generate considerable academic discussion among anthropologists, archaeologists, and oral historians. It was likely a different mix of motivations for different voyages, at different times, and in different parts of the vast Pacific. What is undeniable is that these voyages were not random drifts. They were purposeful, planned undertakings, made possible by an extraordinary body of navigational knowledge and sophisticated maritime technology. The decision to launch a voyaging canoe across thousands of miles of open ocean to carry one's entire community and its future into the unknown was one of the most courageous and consequential choices in human history. It was driven by a complex tapestry of human needs, ambitions, and a profound, enduring connection to the great ocean that both separated and, for those who knew its secrets, ultimately connected their scattered island worlds. You're now deeply immersed in the world of Polynesian wayfinding, understanding the incredible courage, the profound knowledge, and the diverse motivations that propelled these ancient mariners across the vast Pacific to settle some of the most remote islands on Earth. But this extraordinary seafaring prowess, this ability to read the stars and swells like an open book, didn't just spring into existence fully formed when the first canoes were launched into the Eastern Pacific. It was the culmination of a much longer journey, a legacy passed down through countless generations, its deepest roots stretching back to an even earlier, equally remarkable a group of oceanic explorers, the Lapita peoples. As you trace the wake of Polynesian voyaging, you find yourself encountering these shadowy, yet profoundly influential ancestors, the true pioneers who first cracked the code of long-distance Pacific voyaging and laid the cultural and technological foundations for all that was to come. The Lapita Cultural Complex, as archaeologists call it, flourished roughly between 1600 BCE and 500 BCE, or, if you prefer more ancient dating, about 3600 to 2500 years ago. A key historical fact is that the Lapita people are recognized as the direct ancestors of modern Polynesians, as well as some coastal Melanesian and Micronesian groups. Their origins are generally traced back to island Southeast Asia, perhaps Taiwan or the Philippines, from where they began an astonishing eastward migration out into the Pacific, a journey that would eventually take them across thousands of miles of open ocean to previously uninhabited island groups. They weren't just drifting, they were deliberately exploring and settling, carrying with them their distinctive culture, their domesticated plants and animals, the precursors to that Polynesian toolkit. We discussed, and crucially, their sophisticated maritime technology and navigational skills, It's like finding out that your favorite groundbreaking rock band actually had an incredibly cool, slightly more obscure proto-punk predecessor band that taught them all their best riffs and stage moves. What makes the Lapita people so identifiable archaeologically, and what allows us to trace their incredible expansion across the Pacific, is their highly distinctive pottery. Lapita pottery is characterized by intricate, stamped, geometric patterns, zigzags, triangles, repeating motifs, and sometimes stylized human faces or figures, often created by pressing a dentate tooth-like stamp into the wet clay before firing. Finding sherds of this unique pottery on a remote Pacific island is like finding a calling card from these ancient seafarers, a clear sign that Lapita was here. These pots weren't just utilitarian, they were likely carriers of cultural identity and symbolic meaning. Their patterns perhaps even encoding ancestral stories or navigational information, though this last point is more speculative. Oh, another beautiful piece of Lapita pottery, with the classic confused chicken trying to solve a geometry problem motif. An archaeologist might exclaim, clearly, this indicates a sophisticated understanding of, well, at least of how to make really nice, distinctively patterned pots that will baffle us for millennia. The Lapita expansion was a remarkable feat. Starting from the Bismarck Archipelago near New Guinea, they sailed eastward, island hopping across near Oceania the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, and then, in a series of increasingly bold leaps across much wider stretches of open water. They became the first humans to reach and settle remote Oceania, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, the very heartland from which the later Polynesian migrations would spring. This was a journey into a sea of islands that no humans had ever seen before, requiring not just incredible courage, but also a highly developed system of navigation and robust ocean-going outrigger or double-hulled canoes capable of carrying colonists and their essential supplies. They were the original astronauts of the Pacific, exploring and settling new worlds with the technology available to them. A quirky and rather fascinating aspect of Lapita archaeology is the ongoing search for their exact origins in Southeast Asia and the precise routes and timing of their initial dispersal into the Pacific. While the general outline is clear, the finer details are still being pieced together through a combination of archaeological excavation, linguistic analysis as the Austronesian language family, to which Polynesian languages belong, spread with them, and increasingly ancient DNA studies, which are helping to trace their genetic lineage and connections to modern Pacific populations. The navigational skills of the Lapita people must have been formidable. Laying the direct groundwork for the later Polynesian wayfinders, they would have possessed a deep knowledge of stars, winds, and ocean currents, and the ability to make deliberate, targeted voyages to islands that were often invisible from their departure point. They were not just drifting aimlessly, they were exploring with intent, seeking out new lands, new resources, and new horizons. The very fact that they successfully settled such widely dispersed island groups, often against prevailing winds and currents on their eastward journey, speaks volumes about their maritime prowess. After the initial rapid settlement of West Polynesia, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa by around 800 BCE, there seems to have been a period often referred to by scholars as the Long Pause, lasting for perhaps 1,000 years or more. During this time, the distinctive Lapita pottery style gradually faded, and the people in this region developed into what we now recognize as the ancestral Polynesian culture. The precise reasons for this long pause in eastward expansion after the initial settlement of West Polynesia, and what specific cultural, technological, or environmental developments occurred during this period that eventually enabled the final great push into the remote corners of East Polynesia, remain a significant area of research and intense discussion among Pacific archaeologists and anthropologists. Noam, was it a period of developing even more sophisticated canoe technology? Were they refining their navigational techniques to cope with even vaster ocean distances? Were they adapting their agricultural practices to new island environments? Or was it perhaps a combination of all these factors, a long gestation period before the final, explosive wave of Polynesian voyaging. What is clear is that when that final wave did begin, around 800 to 1300 CE, carrying Polynesians to Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Aotearoa, and the other far-flung islands of the Polynesian Triangle, they were building upon a legacy of seafaring knowledge and cultural resilience that stretched back directly to their Lapita ancestors. The canoes may have evolved. Some specific navigational techniques may have been refined, but the fundamental spirit of oceanic exploration, the courage to venture into the unknown, and the deep, intimate understanding of the sea were all part of that ancient Lapita inheritance. The wake of those first Lapita canoes, with their distinctively patterned pottery, still ripples through the entire story of Polynesian settlement, a foundational echo in the grand symphony of Pacific wayfinding. You've traced the incredible journey of the Polynesian peoples, from their ancient Lapita ancestors who first ventured into the vastness of remote Oceania, to the master navigators who, with their profound knowledge of stars, swells, and subtle natural signs, successfully settled the most far-flung islands of the Pacific. For centuries, this sophisticated art of wayfinding, this intricate dance between human intellect and the ocean world, was the lifeblood of Polynesian exploration, trade, and cultural connection. But as new sails appeared on the horizon, the towering canvas of European explorers' ships in the 18th and 19th centuries, this ancient, non-instrumental navigational tradition began to face an unprecedented challenge, leading to a period of decline and near loss in many parts of Polynesia. Yet, remarkably, like a dormant seed awaiting the right conditions, much of this ancestral wisdom was not entirely extinguished, and in more recent times you witness a powerful, inspiring renaissance, a determined effort to rediscover, relearn, and reclaim these lost arts of the Pacific wayfinders. The arrival of European explorers like Cook, Bougainville, and Wallace in Polynesia, beginning in the mid-18th century, marked a profound turning point. These Western mariners, with their large metal-fastened ships, their magnetic compasses, their sextants, their chronometers, and their detailed printed charts, represented a radically different approach to navigation. While they were often astounded by the Polynesians' ability to make long ocean voyages in their primitive, from a European perspective, canoes, they generally failed to fully comprehend or appreciate the sophistication of the indigenous navigational systems. They couldn't see the star compass in the navigator's mind, or understand the subtle language of the swells. It's like someone who only understands digital photography trying to appreciate the art of a master painter who works only with natural pigments and handmade brushes. The underlying principles might be about capturing an image, but the tools and the mindset are worlds apart. Fascinating. A bewigged European captain might have noted in his logbook, after encountering a Polynesian canoe thousands of miles from any known Western chart location, they seem to find these tiny islands with remarkable, if entirely inexplicable, luck. Must be some sort of fortunate drifting, I suppose. Or perhaps they have very good eyesight for spotting coconuts floating from 100 leagues away. As European contact intensified, bringing with it colonization, missionary activity, new diseases that decimated indigenous populations, and the introduction of Western technologies and economic systems, the traditional patterns of Polynesian inter-island voyaging were severely disrupted. A key historical fact is that, in many parts of Polynesia, long-distance voyaging in traditional canoes declined sharply, or was even actively suppressed by colonial authorities who perhaps saw it as a threat to their control, or simply as an inefficient mode of transport compared to their own larger vessels. The need for traditional wayfinding skills began to diminish as Western ships. Charts and navigational methods became more dominant, at least for official or commercial purposes. Young Polynesians were increasingly educated in Western-style schools, often taught to dismiss their ancestral knowledge as mere superstition or primitive folklore. The ancient chants that encoded star paths and island genealogies were sung less frequently. The intricate knowledge of swell patterns was passed on to fewer and fewer apprentices. The art, so vital for millennia, was in danger of fading into oblivion. It's a sadly familiar story from many parts of the world where indigenous knowledge systems have been overwhelmed or devalued by colonial forces. But the flame was never entirely extinguished. In some of the more remote island communities, particularly in parts of Micronesia like the Caroline Islands, whose navigators like the legendary Mau Piailug maintained an unbroken tradition. The ancient arts of wayfinding persisted, passed down through a few dedicated lineages, and then, in the latter half of the 20th century, a powerful cultural renaissance began to sweep across Polynesia, a movement to reclaim and celebrate indigenous heritage, language, and traditional skills. And at the very heart of this renaissance was the revival of traditional Polynesian voyaging and navigation. One of the most iconic and influential projects in this revival was the Hokulea, a performance-accurate replica of a traditional Hawaiian double-hulled voyaging canoe. First launched in 1975, the Polynesian Voyaging Society in Hawaii, which built and sailed Hokulea, had a bold vision to demonstrate that their ancestors were capable of intentional, non-instrumental navigation across vast ocean distances, thereby challenging the long-held accidental drift theories and restoring pride in their seafaring heritage. But there was a problem by that time. The traditional art of deep-sea wayfinding had been largely lost in Hawaii itself. To guide Hokulea on its maiden voyage to Tahiti in 1976, they sought the help of Mau Piailug, a master navigator from the Micronesian island of Satawal, one of the last few individuals in the world who still possess the full, traditional knowledge of non-instrument navigation. Mau's willingness to share his sacred, ancestral knowledge with the Hawaiians was a pivotal moment, a generous act of inter-island solidarity that ignited the resurgence of wayfinding across the Pacific. You can imagine the excitement and the immense pressure as Hokulea set sail, guided only by Mau's reading of the stars, the swells, and the winds. A journey into the past to reclaim the future? Right. Mau might have calmly instructed his new Hawaiian apprentices, amidst the skeptical gaze of the Western world. Forget your fancy gadgets. The ocean will tell you everything you need to know. You just have to learn how to listen with your whole being, not just your eyes. And try not to fall overboard. The paperwork for losing an apprentice navigator is almost as bad as losing the entire canoe. The success of Hokulea's voyages, and those of other replica canoes that followed from different parts of Polynesia, like Aotearoa, Tahiti, and the Cook Islands, had a profound impact. It not only validated the incredible skills of the ancient wayfinders, but also inspired a new generation of Polynesians to learn and practice these lost arts. Thus, navigational schools were established. New master navigators were trained, some by Mau Piailug himself, and then by his students, and the knowledge began to be meticulously documented and shared. Blending ancient oral traditions with modern research and understanding, a quirky, though deeply significant, aspect of this revival is the way it has often involved a relearning of how to perceive the natural world with the heightened sensory acuity of the ancestors, feeling the subtle shifts in the canoe's motion, observing the faintest changes in cloud patterns, or even detecting the presence of distant islands by the behavior of bioluminescent organisms in the water at night. The extent to which modern revived wayfinding techniques, often supplemented by contemporary scientific understanding of oceanography and astronomy, perfectly replicate all aspects of ancient pre-contact navigation is, of course, a subject of careful consideration and ongoing discussion by both traditional practitioners and academic researchers. Aotearoa, but the core principles, the reliance on natural signs, and the profound connection to the ocean environment remain a powerful testament to the enduring wisdom of those first Pacific voyagers. This renaissance of wayfinding is more than just an academic exercise or a historical reenactment. It is a living, breathing reaffirmation of cultural identity, a source of immense pride, and a powerful symbol of resilience and self-determination for Polynesian peoples. The lost arts are being found again, the ancient sea roads are being sailed once more, and the whispers of the ancestors are once again being heard, carried on the winds and swells of the vast, life-giving Pacific Ocean. you're now deeply aware of the incredible, almost preternatural skills of the early Polynesian wayfinders. Their ability to read the stars, the swells, the winds, and a symphony of other natural signs to guide their magnificent, voyaging canoes across thousands of miles of open ocean. You've also seen how this profound knowledge, once nearly lost in many areas, has been inspiringly revived in modern times. But how was this vast, complex, and absolutely vital body of navigational lore, this intricate mental map of the Pacific, preserved and transmitted with such accuracy for centuries, even millennia, in societies that did not possess a written language in the way we understand it? The answer lies in the immense power and sophistication of Polynesian oral traditions. The epic chants, the rhythmic songs, the detailed genealogies, the captivating myths and legends that served as living, breathing archives of the sea, encoding generations of accumulated wisdom and heroic voyages in their very structure and performance. Imagine yourself in a Polynesian village, perhaps gathered in a communal meeting house or around a flickering fire under a star-filled night sky, much like the one that would guide the navigators at sea. An elder, a master storyteller, or perhaps a revered navigator PWO themselves, begins to speak or chant. Their voice, rich with the cadences of ancient tradition, weaves a tale not just for entertainment, but for instruction, for remembrance, for the very survival of their people. These weren't just bedtime stories, they were vital cultural encyclopedias, repositories of essential knowledge, including the intricate details of how to journey across the Great Moana. A key historical fact is that Polynesian oral traditions were, and in many places still are, incredibly rich, complex, and capable of preserving vast amounts of detailed information with remarkable fidelity over many generations. This was achieved through rigorous training of specialist keepers of lore, the use of powerful mnemonic devices embedded in poetic structures, and a deep cultural respect for the accuracy and sanctity of these ancestral narratives. It's like having your entire history, your science textbooks, your navigation manuals, and your greatest works of literature all stored not on a hard drive, but in the collective, trained memory of your community, accessible through the beautiful, powerful medium of the spoken or sung word. Right, class, the elder might say to the assembled youngsters, tonight's lesson is Chapter 7 of the great chant of Kupe's voyage to Aotearoa. Pay attention to the verse about the 3 guiding stars that align over the sacred peak of Mauna Kea when the frigate bird flies south for the winter. There will be a quiz. And by quiz, I mean your ability to not get us all hopelessly lost on the next inter-island trading expedition. How did these oral traditions specifically encode navigational knowledge? One common method was through star path chants. These would describe a sequence of specific stars that a navigator should follow, their rising or setting points on the horizon, to maintain a particular course to a known island or island group. The chant might also include information about the time of year when that star path was most favorable, or landmarks like other constellations to look for along the way. For example, a chant might say something like, when the eye of the fish, a particular star gleams in the east, and the shark's fin, another constellation brushes the western wave. Hold your prow steady between them. And in 7 suns, the low green hills of Manahiki will rise from the sea. These weren't just poetic descriptions. They were precise navigational instructions, learned by rote and passed down through generations of navigators. Genealogies, which were incredibly important in Polynesian societies for establishing lineage, land rights, and social status, could also serve as mnemonic maps. Islands themselves were often considered to be related, part of a great ancestral family, and the genealogical connections between them, recited in chants, could encode information about their relative positions, the order in which they were settled, or the traditional voyaging routes that linked them. Myths and legends about gods, demigods, and heroic ancestral voyagers also played a crucial role. Stories of Maui fishing up islands with his magic fishhook, or of Hina navigating by the moon, or of great migration leaders like Kupe or Hotu Matua, often contained embedded navigational information, allegorical descriptions of ocean currents, wind patterns, or the characteristics of distant lands. These stories made the abstract knowledge of wayfinding more memorable, more engaging, and imbued it with a sacred ancestral authority. A quirky and rather fascinating aspect of some Polynesian oral traditions related to navigation is the possible use of physical mnemonic devices to accompany the chants or teachings. While the Marshallese stick charts, which depicted swell patterns and island locations, are perhaps the most famous example of a more tangible map from this broader Pacific voyaging world, though distinct from Polynesian core traditions in some respects, it's possible that other, more perishable aids were used elsewhere. Perhaps specific arrangements of pebbles or shells, or even intricate knots in a cord, could represent star patterns or island chains, used by a master to teach an apprentice before being committed to memory. Or, as some traditions suggest, hand gestures and body movements might have been used in conjunction with chants to physically map out star paths or the feel of different swell patterns against the canoe. The precise range and nature of such physical mnemonic aids, used in conjunction with purely oral navigational training across the entirety of Polynesia, are still areas of ongoing research. As such, ephemeral teaching tools would rarely survive in the archaeological record. The training to become a repository of this oral lore, especially for a navigator, was incredibly demanding. It required years, often decades, of dedicated memorization and recitation, under the strict tutelage of a master. The accuracy of transmission was paramount. A forgotten verse or a misremembered star path could have disastrous consequences on an actual voyage. The recitation of these sacred chants and voyage narratives was often a formal, almost ritualized occasion, imbued with a sense of reverence and spiritual power. So, as you imagine yourself listening to these ancient songs of travel, these epic poems that chart not just the deeds of heroes, but the very pathways across the boundless ocean, you realize that this was a library without walls, a university without books, a tradition of knowledge as profound and as sophisticated as any written down in ink on papyrus or parchment. The Polynesian navigators carried their charts in their minds, their sailing directions in their songs, their history in their hearts. Their oral traditions were the invisible, yet incredibly resilient, threads that wove together their scattered island worlds, preserving the wisdom of the ancestors and guiding their canoes. Generation after generation, across the great, silent, and starlit expanse of Te Moana Nui Akiwa, you're now deeply immersed in the world of the Polynesian wayfinder, a world where the heavens are a star-strewn map and ancient chants carry the wisdom of generations across the vast Pacific. We've explored their sophisticated understanding of celestial navigation, their intricate knowledge of ocean swells, their keen observation of winds, clouds, and birds, and the powerful oral traditions that preserve this precious sea lore. But beyond these more tangible skills, there was another, perhaps even more profound, dimension to their art, the navigator's extraordinary, almost preternatural sensory attunement to the ocean environment, an ability to feel the very pulse of the sea and to perceive its most subtle whispers through every fiber of their being. This wasn't just about looking and listening. It was about a holistic, deeply embodied connection to the great Moana, a kind of sixth sense honed by a lifetime of experience and an intimate dialogue with the elements. Imagine the master navigator, the PWO on the deck of the voyaging canoe. Perhaps on a dark, starless night when the clouds have obscured their celestial guides, or during a period of confusing, shifting winds. While others on board might feel lost or disoriented, the navigator remains a calm, centered presence. Their eyes, of course, are constantly scanning, and they alert for any visual cue, but their other senses are equally, if not more, engaged. A key historical fact, attested by both early European observers who sailed with traditional navigators and by modern practitioners of revived wayfinding, is the incredible importance of this heightened sensory awareness. The navigator wasn't just in the canoe, they were, in a sense, an extension of it. Their body a finely tuned instrument registering every nuance of the ocean's mood and movement. It's like they had an organic, built-in array of super-sensitive environmental sensors, far more sophisticated than any modern gadget when it came to interpreting the holistic picture. Forget your fancy weather apps. A PWO might gently chide a modern, instrument-reliant sailor. Can your app feel the subtle shift in the deep swell that tells of a distant storm 5 days before it arrives? Can it smell the damp earth of an unseen island on the night breeze? I thought not. Now, pass me that coconut. I'm feeling a bit analytically thirsty. One of the most crucial of these embodied senses was their kinesthetic awareness, their ability to feel the motion of the canoe through the water. As we've discussed, they could identify and interpret multiple, often overlapping swell patterns. This wasn't just a visual observation of wave directions, it was a deeply physical sensation. By lying down in the hull of the canoe, particularly in the quiet hours of the night, a navigator could feel the subtle lift, pitch, roll, and yaw of the vessel as it interacted with different swells. They could distinguish the long, steady rhythm of a primary deep ocean swell from the quicker, more confused motion caused by refracted or reflected waves near an island. Their own body became a kind of seismograph, registering the ocean's faintest tremors and deciphering their meaning. Some accounts, as we've touched upon, even mention the rather quirky, though perhaps apocryphal, tidbit of navigators using particularly sensitive parts of their anatomy, like their testicles, dipped in the water or pressed against the hull, to detect these minute vibrations with even greater acuity. While the specifics might be debated, the underlying principle of profound bodily attunement is clear. They weren't just sailing on the ocean, they were in a constant, tactile conversation with it. Their sense of hearing would also be highly developed. The sound of the wind in the pendanus sails, the creak of the canoe's timbers and lashings, the myriad sounds of waves slapping against the hulls. These were not just background noise. An experienced navigator could likely discern subtle changes in these sounds that might indicate a shift in wind direction or speed, or the different wave patterns characteristic of shallow water near a reef or an approaching shoreline. The cries of specific seabirds, heard even when the birds themselves were not visible, could also carry information about the proximity and direction of land. And then there was the sense of smell. On a long ocean voyage, far from the complex aromas of land, the human nose can become incredibly sensitive to new scents carried on the wind. Polynesian navigators were said to be able to detect the smell of land, the fragrance of damp earth after rain, the scent of specific flowering trees or vegetation, even the smoky aroma of distant cooking fires from many miles away, especially if the wind was favorable. This olfactory landfinding was another crucial tool in their arsenal, particularly when visual cues were limited by haze, distance, or darkness. Even changes in water temperature or salinity, however subtle, might be noticed by a navigator trailing a hand in the sea, potentially indicating the influence of ocean currents or the outflow of fresh water from a large island. The very color and clarity of the water. The types of marine life observed certain fish or seaweed are more common near land or in specific currents. The nature of phosphorescence in the water at night. All these were pieces of an intricate puzzle that the navigator was constantly assembling and interpreting. The precise physiological and cognitive mechanisms behind this extraordinary sensory integration and the almost intuitive environmental perception demonstrated by traditional Polynesian navigators are still marveled at and studied by scientists, anthropologists, and cognitive psychologists. It clearly involved more than just acute individual senses. It was about a holistic way of knowing, of synthesizing vast amounts of subtle, often subliminal information into a coherent understanding of one's place within the dynamic ocean environment. This wasn't something that could be easily taught from a book. It had to be lived, breathed, and absorbed over a lifetime of experience at sea, often under the guidance of a master who possessed this deep, embodied wisdom. So, as you imagine yourself on that voyaging canoe, try to sense the world as the Polynesian navigator did. Feel the subtle rocking that tells of a swell born 1,000 miles away. Listen for the change in the wind song. Sniff the air for the first faint promise of unseen land. It's a world where every sense is alive, engaged, a world where the human body itself becomes the most sophisticated navigational instrument, finely tuned to the ancient, ever-shifting rhythms of the great Pacific Ocean. Their connection to the sea was not just intellectual, it was profoundly, almost mystically sensory. You've journeyed across the vast, star-dusted canvas of the Pacific, guided by the ancient wisdom of Polynesian wayfinders. You've marveled at their magnificent voyaging canoes, their intricate mental star compasses, their profound understanding of ocean swells, and their acute sensitivity to the myriad subtle clues offered by wind, cloud, bird, and wave. You've glimpsed the rigorous training that shaped these master navigators, the rich oral traditions that preserve their sea lore, and the deep, almost mystical, sensory attunement that connected them to the very pulse of the great Moana. Now, as our voyage through their world draws to its gentle close, you are left to contemplate the truly extraordinary legacy of these sea people, a legacy of courage, ingenuity, and a profound, enduring connection to the ocean that continues to inspire and instruct us even today as we navigate our own modern tides. The most fundamental legacy of early Polynesian navigation is, quite simply, the peopling of Polynesia itself. A key historical fact that bears repeating is that these wayfinders, using only their non-instrumental knowledge systems, successfully and intentionally explored, discovered, and settled one of the largest and most geographically dispersed regions on Earth. A vast watery realm dotted with tiny, often isolated, island targets. From the shores of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa in West Polynesia, they launched themselves eastward into the unknown, eventually reaching and colonizing the Marquesas. The Society Islands, including Tahiti, the Tuamotus, Hawaii, Rapa Nui Easter Island, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, effectively settling every habitable island in that enormous triangle. This was not a series of random accidents or fortunate drifts. It was one of the greatest feats of deliberate exploration and migration in human history, a testament to their sophisticated maritime technology, their profound environmental knowledge, and their incredible human courage and resilience. Imagine the sheer audacity, the unwavering faith in their ancestral wisdom, required to set sail into an ocean that often offered no visible land for weeks, even months on end, with only the stars, the swells, and their own keenly honed senses to guide them towards an unseen and sometimes entirely unknown destination. It makes complaining about your GPS occasionally taking you down a one-way street seem rather trivial in comparison. Oh dear, a modern driver might fret. My satellite navigation says recalculating. This is a disaster. The Polynesian Navigator might just calmly observe a slight shift in a long-period swell and adjust course by half a star house. Business as usual. This legacy of navigational prowess is a profound source of cultural pride and identity for modern Polynesian peoples. For many years, as we've seen, Western scholarship often downplayed or misunderstood the capabilities of these ancient wayfinders, attributing their settlement of the Pacific to accidental voyages. The Polynesian voyaging renaissance of the late 20th century, spearheaded by the remarkable voyages of replica canoes like the Hokulea and guided by master navigators like Mau Piailug, powerfully refuted these dismissive theories. These modern voyages, successfully recreating ancient long-distance routes using only traditional non-instrumental techniques, not only demonstrated the scientific validity and astonishing accuracy of ancestral wayfinding methods, but also ignited a powerful cultural reawakening across Polynesia. Young Polynesians are now learning these ancient arts, reconnecting with their seafaring heritage, and finding a deep sense of empowerment and cultural continuity in the wisdom of their ancestors. The canoes are sailing again. The star paths are being retraced, and the ancient chants are once more being heard on the open ocean. It's a beautiful, living testament to the enduring spirit of these sea people. A quirky and rather inspiring tidbit from this revival is how it has often involved a relearning, not just of techniques, but of a whole way of being in the world, a heightened sensory awareness, and a deep, almost spiritual connection to the natural environment that is often lost in our modern, technology-saturated lives. Modern apprentice navigators speak of learning to feel the canoe as an extension of their own bodies, of developing an intuitive understanding of the ocean's moods, of seeing the night sky not as a random scattering of lights, but as a familiar, ordered map. It's a profound re-engagement with an ancient epistemology. The legacy of Polynesian wayfinding also offers valuable lessons for the wider world, particularly in an age where we are increasingly grappling with issues of sustainability and our relationship with the natural environment. These ancient navigators possessed a profound ecological wisdom. Their survival depended on a deep, respectful understanding of natural systems, the stars, the ocean currents, the winds, marine life, island ecosystems. They were not just exploiting nature, they were in a constant dialogue with it, reading its signs, respecting its power, and living in a kind of dynamic harmony with its rhythms. Their voyages were often undertaken with a keen awareness of resource management, carrying only what was essential, and with the goal of establishing sustainable communities on new islands. There's a powerful message here for us today about the importance of observation, adaptability, and living within the limits of our planet's resources. Perhaps a wise old Polynesian navigator might gently suggest to our modern, resource-hungry world, instead of trying to conquer nature with ever more complex gadgets, you might try listening to it a little more carefully. It has a tendency to whisper very important secrets to those who are patient enough to pay attention. The ongoing dialogue between traditional Polynesian knowledge holders, particularly the revived community of master navigators, and Western scientists, oceanographers, astronomers, anthropologists, continues to enrich our understanding of these sophisticated navigational systems and their underlying scientific and cognitive principles. This collaboration is helping to preserve this invaluable human heritage and to ensure that its lessons are not lost to future generations. Ultimately, the enduring spirit of Polynesian navigation lies in its testament to human potential. It demonstrates what is possible with courage, with ingenuity, with deep, patient observation, and with a profound connection to the world around us. These ancient mariners, with their seemingly simple tools and their vast mental libraries of sea lore, achieved something truly extraordinary. They made the largest, most formidable ocean on Earth their home, their highway, and their enduring legacy. The whispers from their voyaging canoes, carried on the trade winds and the ocean swells, still speak to us today of a world woven together by courage, skill, and the timeless human desire to explore what lies beyond the horizon. Their journey is a song that the Pacific still sings. And so, as the last imaginary voyaging canoe makes its landfall, guided by the silent wisdom of the stars and the ancient rhythms of the ocean swells, our journey into the world of early Polynesian navigators gently comes to its end. We have sailed across a vast mental ocean, marveling at their courage, their incredible knowledge, and their profound, almost mystical connection to the natural world. They were true pioneers, artists of the sea, who read the Pacific like an open book, their minds the only charts, their senses the only instruments they needed to explore and settle one of the most expansive and challenging environments on our planet. As the image of their sleek canoes, their keen-eyed navigators, and the star-dusted ocean skies begins to soften and dissolve into the quiet of your surroundings, may you carry with you a sense of wonder at their achievement and a peaceful appreciation for the deep wisdom that can be found in observing and understanding the world around us. The great ocean of your own night now awaits. May your passage into sleep be smooth, your dreams filled with gentle breezes and distant guiding stars. Sweet dreams.